In today's video, I'll be reviewing the Airbus A400M Atlas, a new bit of payware developed by Roland Laborie, available for Microsoft Flight Simulator on PC. Hello everyone, it's Brandon here from the Pilot Stud channel. I hope you're having an absolutely marvellous day. Today I'll be taking a look at and reviewing the Atlas for Microsoft Flight Simulator, so without further delay, let me get right into it. Okay, first off, let me give you some background information about the A400. Of course, as you can see on your screen, it's a 4-engine, turboprop military transport aircraft. It was designed by a multinational consortium, of course, headed up by the aircraft manufacturer Airbus. The aircraft took to the skies for the first time on the 11th of December 2009 and now sees active use with air forces across the world, being a sort of natural replacement to the much loved C-130. It has a wingspan of 45.1 metres, a total length of 42.4 metres, and is powered by 4 Europrop TP40 D6 engines. Notable operators include the Royal Air Force, the Luftwaffe and the French Air and Space Force. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, you can pick it up on PC for €36, which includes 20% UK tax, and that's directly off the Sim Market website. It was released just 5 days ago on the 7th of April 2023, and now we're going to get right into the review. So to kick it off, first off, let's talk about the cockpit. In my opinion, this cockpit is acceptable, but it just about gets by. Textures aren't blurry to the point where it ruins the experience, but there seems to be an over-reliance on block colours and block textures, resulting in a somewhat unrealistic experience. There also seems to be some bugs with some of the displays, but I'll be talking about that more when it comes to systems. If you head to the back of the cockpit, like I am in Microsoft Flight Simulator now, you'll notice that one of the manuals says P3D right at the top. Now, I don't know whether or not this has been left in as a reference or has been left in because the developer forgot to take it out when he was porting possibly parts of his previous product over. But in my opinion, and this is just only my opinion, it does feel like some parts of this cockpit have been ported over from the previous simulator, and that results in some areas of this cockpit looking somewhat unrealistic, or at least not up to Microsoft Flight Simulator standard. Now, as you'll find out in a minute, most of the buttons in this cockpit do actually work. Maybe not as Airbus intended, but they do have some sort of functionality in Microsoft Flight Simulator, so definitely a plus point for the developer there. There's also some good animations, from the tray table that you can pull out to the armrests which you can drop down. It's clear this has not been a direct port over, and is definitely closer to something I'd expect from Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft. But when you consider I paid £36 for this product, I would expect the cockpit to look slightly nicer. It's not terrible, it definitely doesn't destroy the value of the product to me yet, but in my opinion the cockpit just doesn't look good. It's probably going to get a 4 out of 10. If these textures were brought up to Microsoft Flight Simulator standard, combined with the somewhat custom system modelling, this would be very impressive, but the developer does fall slightly short there. Now let's talk about the external model. Similar thing can also be said. In many ways this feels like a P3D port over. While the modelling is good, textures feel out of date, which once again point to a P3D port over. If you're a guy that likes rivets being 3D, well, pardon the pun here, but the modelling is actually quite plain. As you can see, we're not getting any 3D rivets here, but that aside, that pun has chucked me off slightly, to be fair. I'm pretty embarrassed of that. That aside, you know, the modelling, well, by all means it looks good in the right lighting conditions, but it's definitely not up there with some of the other payware products we've already seen on Microsoft Flight Simulator. So once again, a lot to be desired here. Getting close to the propellers, I'm unsure if this is what an aircraft propeller looks like in real life. I confess, despite the fact I work at a busy airport, I've never seen propellers do something like that, but who knows, that just might be a visual bug as opposed to the propeller shaking around like that in the simulator. All in all, as you've been seeing from the flying footage and our little walk around at RAF Bryce Norton, the external model leaves a lot to be desired. With the exception of the propellers, animations are definitely very good on this aircraft. Everything flows as you'd expect, from the flaps coming down to the ailerons being smooth, to the rudder of course being modelled correctly. But a real highlight here is the doors. Many of them do actually work, which is great to see. One thing I can't get to work is the ramp. I imagine there is a way to get it opened, but I haven't found it yet, and I don't believe I was provided with a manual, so I guess I'll just have to do some soul searching there to eventually figure out how to open the ramp, which of course is a highlight. There is actually some stuff in the back, but as far as I know, there's no way to change that. All in all, in terms of how it looks, it sort of looks good, it sort of doesn't look good. I would say it just about ticks the box in terms of what I would expect for a Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft, but then I remembered that I paid €36 for it, and it does leave a slightly bitter taste in my mouth. It's by no means terrible, but there is definitely many points to be improved upon, and I hope the developer, if he does watch this, takes my constructive criticism and does go about updating this product, because in my opinion, it does have potential. Heading back into the cockpit, it's that time of the video where we talk about systems, which for many is the most important part of a Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft. Let's get that tray table away. Now, in all honesty, the developer, while it doesn't look like an Airbus A320, in my opinion he has used quite a few of the default A320 systems. For example, the screens down here, which incorporates some sort of McDo, well, it's directly taken from the Airbus A320. There is nothing that screams a military aircraft down here for me. So that's been taken directly from the default aircraft. Speaking about the PFD as well, there's nothing that makes it look like the Airbus A400. And something that really is the cherry on the top for me is if I pull down the heads-up display, you can see it is just a direct port over of the primary flight display. Nothing wrong with that because it is still functional, but it's not realistic to the A400 heads-up display, which looks something a bit more like this. So that's pretty much a shame. Now moving up to the mode control panel, once again this is very reliant on the default A320 systems. Now quite luckily for the developer, I do believe they share a very similar autopilot system in real life, so there isn't really much harm in taking the default Airbus system and planting it into the A400. There really isn't anything wrong with that because they are very similar in real life. It does mean, however, if you're used to the accuracy of either the fly-by-wire systems or indeed the Phoenix A320 systems, you're going to be in for a shock because this is, at the end of the day, very much reliant on default avionics from Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's not all bad. Many of the switches over in the overhead panel do work as you'd expect, but some of them, and this is sort of a recurring theme, do feel quite binary. It's sort of, you press a button and it turns something directly off, or turns something directly on. He hasn't developed this aircraft in a sort of holistic manner where everything works together with each other. I'll give the example of the IRS system, which has been quite nicely modelled. Of course you can see it here. If I just turn it off, you can see we do actually get what you'd expect to see on the screens. The aircraft hasn't been aligned to the GPS. But I can turn that on straight away and within a few seconds everything will come back on, which of course isn't realistic to real life. Unlike aircraft such as the fly-by-wire A320 or indeed the Phoenix A320, there is no fly pad to adjust how long it does take for the IRS alignment. There is just a predetermined time. So it's not like this is actually aligning to anything in real life, it's basically just turning the screens on or off. I know that's a pretty petty feature, but for some people that will matter, and I'm just using that as an example. And that sort of theme can be addressed to the whole aircraft. The developer has made some effort to make the aircraft feel like an A400 in terms of its systems, but at the end of the day, many of these systems have been ported over from default aircraft and then updated in a way to make them look more military-like. I'll give the example of turning all these sort of digits up here green instead of their distinctive orange hue. Nothing wrong with that, I'm sure most people won't care, but it is something to bear in mind. Aside from that, systems are pretty good. One thing that does annoy me, and you can notice it now on the eCam display, is that I believe this is a Microsoft Flight Simulator bug, but you actually have to zoom in to see it correctly. If I sit in my seat as I normally would, you can see I pretty much can't read anything off there. Systems have been made to feel like the A400, however they are very reliant off default Microsoft Flight Simulator systems. So while it's not a direct port over and the developer has put some effort in, it's by no means impressive, and for €36 I would expect something slightly more. Moving over to flight model, this is always very hard to judge. I've never flown an A400 for obvious reasons. I've only flown a 152, so my experience here is very, very limited. I'd say it flies quite nicely. It does feel very light on landing. You've got to remember, this is an aircraft that is designed for operating off short runways, so once you get those flaps down, you will find that this aircraft does lift off the ground very quickly. And that's about all I can say with flight model. There's nothing that really sticks out. It flies quite nicely, and to be honest, it's quite fun to hand fly. Now there will be a sound preview at the end of this video, so feel free to listen to sounds. I'd say sounds are a bit of a letdown. They're very, once again, binary. It's very much on or off, linking back to systems as soon as you press a switch. For example, with the engines, they'll basically just cut out in terms of audio, and of course, spool down visually. It's a bit of a letdown here because some of the sounds are good, but the majority of them are pretty unrealistic, so feel free to skip to the sound preview to hear them. So while sounds are great and flight model is a bit iffy, I think it is somewhat realistic, but there are times where I'm flying this and I'm like going way too slow, and I think an A400 would stall at that speed. But as I said, I've never flown an A400, so it's very hard to judge, and nothing exactly sticks out to me as completely unrealistic. There are a few bugs. To be fair, these are quite annoying and may break the deal for you. For example, the cockpit windows seem to give everything outside a blue tint. As well as that, spawning in, you'll notice the aircraft sort of falls into the ground, it sort of jumps down, or in some cases actually merges into the ground. To me, this points to a port over. I remember when Microsoft Flight Simulator first come out, and there was that Flight Simulator X converter tool. If you had converted an aircraft with that tool, there was always a chance that it would just spawn in halfway in the ground, I guess because something didn't translate over correctly. So I'm sort of getting that feeling from it. These bugs are annoying. They don't completely break it for me. It's not like I can't fly this aircraft. I can, but it's something to bear in mind. That brings us to the end part of this video, where I share with you my thoughts of this aircraft. For €36, I do feel a bit let down. In my opinion, too many parts of this aircraft have been ported over from what seems to be the previous version on P3D. While the developer has clearly made a conscious effort to update this aircraft to make it work with Microsoft Flight Simulator, to me, it feels like many of the systems are now just Microsoft Flight Simulator systems, with the exception of the eCam displays. Most of the systems just link straight back to default Microsoft Flight Simulator systems, and normally there's nothing wrong with that, but when I've paid quite a bit of money for it, in my opinion, that's not good enough. Don't get me wrong, some people might like it. It's a very simple aircraft to fly, and if you like the A400, please do take a look at it. But for most of you, this is sort of going to leave you waiting around for something a bit better. It's definitely not the worst thing I've ever bought, but it's definitely not the best thing I've ever purchased for the simulator either. In my opinion, there is still quite a bit of work to do, but I do salute the developer because he hasn't released a terrible product. There's just quite a bit of polishing up that needs to occur. On that note, I give it a rating of 5 out of 10. It's a good start, but some things need to change for me to get anywhere close to recommending it. Whenever I do these sorts of reviews, it's always out of my own pocket, so you just giving me some feedback is very much appreciated. The A400, in my opinion, is a really fun aircraft to fly, but it's not worth the money. On that note, guys, have a fantastic day. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.